Hi, I'm Ian.
And I'm Jason.
And this is Ghosts and Bears, the only podcast where we bring you the actual ghosts
with the actual stories
from actual bears. On this episode of Ghosts and Bears, we're heading for the forest. And along with that comes a lot of things you might not be expecting in the trees. Stay with us, coming up on Ghosts and Bears. Well, hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I am well. We have had quite the couple of weeks since we last recorded, but things are good. We always seem to have some kind of adventures. School is building up for you, but also going well, correct?
Yeah. I did well last semester, so that's good. And now we're back into it again. So
yeah.
Year two.
No break. No,
year two.
Year two.
I just submitted my economics thing. It was 22 pages for my first assignment.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a lot.
Good old MBA.
Good old MBA.
But you missed me on the last one because we got dumped a mountain of reading.
Yeah.
It literally opened up like 48 hours before, and we had to read hundreds of pages.
I think we survived. I think
well, I'm still here.
I think our podcast people will agree that I was okay.
Thank
I pulled
you.
it off.
So here we are.
Here we are. I've also been up to some exciting new things. We're launching Prince George Ghostly Walks.
Yes, that's right.
So plotted the route out last week.
Yeah, we did.
Got some new stories. I bought some books of local history. So yeah, I think it should actually be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. It starts soon, doesn't it?
End of June. Last weekend in June. They're going to be on the last weekend of June, July, and August, and then 3 of the 4 weeks in October.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, because the one middle week, you and I are in Calgary.
That's right.
For that book launch for Calgary's Most Haunted.
Yes, Calgary's Most Haunted.
I know. It's crazy. Marching on. So that's kind of what's going on. And then Prince George, Northern BC, the world is waking up.
Yeah.
We've seen bears.
Yes, it is.
Moose.
The trees are super green and beautiful.
Everything's very green. All the flowers are out.
Yeah.
We saw some of those mafia deer.
Oh, yeah. They're huge.
They're huge and raggedy. They're not like the delicate ballerina-like deer on Vancouver Island. These deer will mess you up.
Bambis.
No, not Bambis. They will fight back, and they will crush you if you shoot at their mom.
Yeah, I would say stay away.
Yeah, I'm going to be safe. So we have been, if you've noticed, there's some kind of funky, cool new artwork for the podcast that I'm excited about, and we're going to be doing more of that. And also, because of our format, I'm able to do kind of ahead of time some things. So one of the things I've been doing is coming up with future episodes. So this episode is going to be Ghosts of the Forest, International Forest, because they're from all over the world, these stories, which is very cool. And then we're going to be having a schools episode, Haunted Schools. And then we're doing a whole theme thing with summer holidays.
Yeah.
So all the haunted places you find on your summer holidays. So
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God. So that should carry us through until September. So that'd be good. So we're looking forward to that. Today's stories, like I said, they're from all over the world. And what did you think of them? Did you like them when you read them?
There's good ones to be had.
Well, that's good. Thanks.
Yes, no, they were good.
All right. So we're going to jump into that, and we will be right back after this, and we will have stories from international forests of the world. Oh, wait. What are we near?
Forests for the world.
For the world. Isn't that hilarious?
For
the world. There is in Prince George, there is an actual forest park, and that is the name of it. And Jason and I are always amazed at how confident the person who named that must have been to decide that that particular piece of the forest was
for the world.
For the world. Yeah, pretty great. All right, so we'll be right back after this with some stories from the forests of the world. Well, no, not that one, but from all over the world. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. We'll be right back. All right, Mr. Jason is going to kick us off with our first story.
It's a story from Croatia.
Very cool. We have a friend from Croatia.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So this is a story for you. This story is from a forest in Croatia. There was a new road going through my forest made last year. I walked my dogs there a couple of times, but I never went too far. Until this time, when I went all the way to the end of the road. There was a dead end, and after that, nothing but forest. There was also a cliff, drop off, so there was no more paths I or anyone else could walk. I sat there on the forest floor and was giving my dogs water when I heard someone calling me. They, he or she, I couldn't quite recognize if it was male or female voice, were shouting my name. I wasn't quite sure if I heard it right, so I stood still and waited to hear if they will say it again. And they did. They repeated it a few times, and now I was 100% sure they were calling my name. I thought it was maybe someone who I knew, so I shouted back. No response. They just continued shouting my name over and over again. I eventually got up and returned home. I could still hear my name shouted as I was walking away. I don't know what that was, and I'm not sure if it was a person. Where were they? Because as I already said, there was a cliff at the end of the road, not a place where people could walk, and the shouts were coming from that direction from the forest, like someone was at the bottom of the cliff. I always went down that road a couple more times after that, and nothing weird happened. I always felt kind of uneasy there, since the part of the forest was a bit dark, so I feel watched at times, especially now since that happened. It's like I expect something is out there just waiting on me.
Yeah, no.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun.
I mean, I have heard of that in forests before.
It happens all the time at forests.
Yeah.
For the world.
For the world.
For the world.
But I'm not sure I'd be going back.
Well,
like
I
that
would.
person would. I'm like, no, I'm
Why not?
good. Why? Some phantom is calling your name in the forest, and you're like, yeah, I'll go check it out.
Yeah, why not? They're calling you for a reason.
Yeah, to kill you.
Well, you don't know that.
Pretty sure.
Maybe they want to give you candy.
Well,
Croatian candy.
now I know how you're going to go.
Maybe. I'll just aimlessly wander.
I'll be like,
Jason with the NBA.
we have candy.
We have candy.
Come for the snacks, stay for the fun.
Yeah, right. That's pretty good.
I find your car the next day abandoned. Oh my God, that was funny. All right. Our next story number 2, Italy. My grandparents used to rent a house in a little mountain village in Italy for 3 months in the summer. And I used to go there every summer since I was 5 until I was 14 with my sister. She's 7 years older than me, and my cousin, who's 3 years younger than me. I really liked my time there, so when I grew older, this passion for the mountains stuck with me. I'm now 26, and every summer I go hiking with my boyfriend. The trails we used to hike are sometimes very stiff and tough, and it's just the two of us, surrounded by the mountain and the silence that covers everything. Sometimes we even camp halfway up if the climb is too long. Oh, this sounds like my definition of hell. One day we were climbing a difficult path near a lake in Italy, and I finished first. So I was waiting for my boyfriend at the end of the path on top of the mountain. It was beautiful there. The butterflies flew on the flowers around me, and the birds were chirping happily. I could see the whole lake surrounded by the forest. I liked to sit in the silence of the mountain and watch the stunning view of the lake and watch the animals around me living their lives. It's relaxing. I was sitting there on a rock, and I don't know how, but I felt something was in the woods behind me. There was a precipice, not very deep, and the forest would cover the end of it and all around. I stood up and tried to see if there was something down there. That's when I saw it. I still get shivers when I think about it deep down there. There was a chamois, a beautiful one with long horns. I got excited because I rarely see one. I was looking at him from behind. His fur was light brown, and he had a black line that went from the neck to the tail. But something was very wrong with it. It looked like his front legs looked like they didn't end with a normal cloven hoof, but they had 3 fingers at the end, similar to a bird claw, but not that sharp. His back legs seemed normal. I could see that it was walking very slowly and calmly through the vegetation. Then I noticed with great horror that his face seemed flat.
Yeah, weird. 2-dimensional.
No muzzle. I couldn't look at him directly in the face, but I couldn't see his forehead and nose, which should have been there. It just wasn't. Thinking about it now, I really wished I had seen his face, just to see how the eyes and mouth were organized.
So weird.
Organized? Yeah.
An organized
face.
What about a disorganized 2-dimensional
Okay, stop.
face?
Stop. He disappeared in the pine shadow, and I was still there shocked when my boyfriend finally arrived. I told him what I saw, and he didn't believe me. He laughed. Yeah, the boyfriends always laugh. They're the first ones to get killed in the movie.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah, that's true.
I know it's not scary, and it can even be funny if you think about it. A chamois with an eagle leg and a flat face. I thought about it all the time we were descending. It was so weird. At the end, I told myself that I must have dreamed it, even if I would love to know that I was the only one to see that thing. I like to think that it was a deity that took the form of a chamois.
You never know.
You never know. There wasn't any village at the mountain's foot, so I couldn't ask if anyone else had seen it too, or if anyone knew anything about a weird animal living in the forest.
Now, for those who are listening, I Googled it. It looks like a small mountain goat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it is like a small, like we have mountain goats here in Canada, but they are hefty, muscular creatures who would toss you off the side of a mountain without a second
This one
thought.
apparently had eagle talons and a 2D face.
I love that.
It's so strange.
That'd be so creepy. I mean,
That's why I said it's interesting, because I read that and I'm like, okay.
it could be really, I mean, it could just be a mutant. Like it could just be a mutated chamois that lived. Do you know what I mean?
A disabled chamois.
You are determined to make fun of this poor story.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I empathize. Someone sees a really ridiculous looking animal.
Yeah.
With horns.
With horns.
Talons.
Talons. And a flat face.
But the back hooves were normal.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a chimera.
Ooh, there you go.
But that would need a snake for a tail, and more like a man for a head.
Anyway, next story.
So this one comes from Australia. My childhood home in Australia was almost 100 years old. Why are they always a century old? Why can't they just be like 10 years old? Or what?
Shut up and read it.
Deep set in bushland, far back from the road. Hard to get to unless you followed a snaking driveway through the eucalyptus and ferns and camphor laurel. Stashed, almost secret, deep into the thickly forested hillside. 6-foot pythons living in the ceiling. Once we found an 11-foot shed skin.
Yuck. Nope, not happening.
No.
Time to move.
Yep, bye. When we moved there, I was 4. I remember a giant mango tree in our backyard. Older than the house, standing beside my mother in the outdoor laundry, I watched a little boy, all dressed in white, kicking through the fallen leaves at the base of the tree. Searching for something, he never looked at me or even looked up. Being a little girl eager to be friends, I ran to my room and adorned myself and be pretty for him. I put on my colorful plastic bangles and rushed back out, but he was gone. I asked my mother, still washing clothes, in plain sight of the tree, where the boy went. She looked at me strangely and asked what boy I was talking about. She hadn't seen him. It's worth mentioning that there was only one way into our property, as it was cased on 3 sides by thick bush land, acres deep. It's possible, but unlikely the boy came through the woodland. Less likely still that he approached without us seeing. Impossible that he came by the road, because we would have had to come through our garden in plain sight. My little brother's room was at the back of the house, by a winding path, overlooking the hill and the forest. He was 2 when we moved there, by 4 telling me of footsteps up the path at night, whispering in his window. He was a quiet kid, not one for make-believe or attention-seeking. He told me he saw a lady running up the path sometimes, but she was there and then she wasn't. He wasn't sure if she was real. By 6, I was absolutely convinced that our house was haunted and considered myself rather an authority upon the matter. One night, as we were being put to bed and I was being tucked in, my little brother knocked on my door, white, eyes wide, shaking and terrified. He was always a quiet little guy. I believed him when he said he heard voices in the window. That night, the voice had said his name. He was so frightened.
That's not
I
good.
told my parents he could sleep in my room with me, and he did. To this day, he backs the story of that night up. He's 29 years old now. I believed him then, and I believe him still. It's strange. As kids, I never thought our parents took us seriously. Only as a teenager, after they divorced and my dad sold the house, did I find out not only did they believe us, they were spooked by the house as much as we were.
And just to interject here, that's super common.
Yeah.
The parents will play it down.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they don't want to scare the kids, but they are totally aware that weird stuff's happening.
That's very true.
Sorry, please keep going.
My dad built a veranda onto the kitchen and knocked out the old back door. Before he knocked it out, you could smell kerosene burning in the kitchen at night, but only in that one place. Liquid kerosene smells different to burning kerosene, and there wasn't even any kerosene in the house. After he knocked out the door, it never happened again. One night in the living room, we heard a gunshot outside the back door. I remember Mother and Father looking at each other, something passing between them. My dad loaded his gun and turned the lights out. They told me to stay inside and be quiet. Dad searched, but there was no one there. We had kelpies, and none of them made a sound. Another strange thing was how when I walked the kelpies as a little girl before school, there was a place on the hill at the edge of the forest where they would bark and refuse to go any further. In my own childlike way, I understood someone lived there with us, and they were lonely. I gave him a name and left him food and paintings I had done. I like to think I brought him comfort. Maybe I did. It was a strange house. Years later, when my family had split up, one night, Dad lay in bed with my stepmother. She was on the edge of sleep when she saw a man standing in the doorway to the bedroom, in silhouette, aboriginal looking back at her. She quietly asked my father if he could see him too. Softly in the dark, she heard my father reply, yes, in the doorway. Dad sold the house not long after that. He said it didn't feel right. Truth is, the stranger than fiction, and I end up renting the house a few years later from the man my father sold it to. I was searching, my boyfriend with me at the time, for a house in the forest where I could have a garden and a cat. Everything was out of the price range, and I suggested we go for a drive through my childhood neighborhood. My old home was up for rent and affordable. It felt totally odd moving back. The fact that it was haunted was not the least of it. I will never forget the first night we spent there before the power was switched on. Sitting in the kitchen, it was midwinter freezing for Australia, the wind howling through the forest around the house, and my kitten curled in my lap. Through the huge glass sliding doors that overlooked the yard, a translucent white shape floated up the stairs and across the veranda. I was rigid with fear, praying that I had imagined it. When my lad looked at me, he said, "You saw it too." Luckily, he was as steely as I was. We slept in the center of the house, surrounded by candles, spooked. But that was before anyone had a mobile phone, and no way were we walking 3 kilometers into town. Oddly enough, when his 2 best mates moved in, the one who had my brother's old room said he heard footsteps on the path outside his window every night. I never had the heart to tell him about the night my brother heard his name being whispered through that same window. As my little cat grew, he would hiss at things he could not see. My pet python would strike at things I couldn't see. Once, I was looking after a bird for a friend and was holding it, for it was hand-reared. Without warning, the bird panicked. The cat was nowhere near, not even in the same room, and fluttering, shrieking, and flying at the windows. Eventually, it found its way out and flew away. I had recurring dreams of a little girl with dark eyes and a sweet, sad face, always in the forest, in the same place where the kelpies would bark as a child. She never gave me any insight into the house or herself. She would look at me, and then I would wake. I don't know if the dreams had anything to do with the house, but when we moved, plainly I did not renew the particular lease. I never had those dreams again. Like a switch was shut off. I did a cleansing and prayer to Goddess to bless the ground and dwelling before I left the house for the last time. It was a beautiful house to grow up in, but it had a history of viscous as tree sap.
Wow. That's a lot going on there.
That is a lengthy one.
But to grow up in that house and have those experiences and then go back and rent the house?
Yeah. I wonder if where this house is in Australia.
That's pretty wild.
Sounds pretty remote.
Yeah. And to see the Aboriginal man, that'd be pretty wild. So they're obviously in somewhere sacred.
Who knows?
Who knows? All right. Our next story is from USA.
Yeah, right.
All right. This story is from the US. The other night, I had my friend Mike over. It was around 11 p.m. when this happened. Mike had gone outside because it was too hot in the house, and we have a forest area in the backyard. Mike left before me, and I was to follow him out a few minutes later. I started walking outside and towards the forest. I usually look at the ground when I walk, but not this time because I needed to see where I was going. My paranoia got to me, and I expected Mike to be somewhere in the dark waiting to pounce and freak me out. Okay, now we know what kind of a friend Mike is.
Yeah, no kidding.
Halfway to the forest, there's a little red barn that used to be a chicken coop. Once there, I called him, and he seemed to be near the trees, so I didn't have to worry about him trying to scare me. I continued walking, and I got near the edge of the forest. I looked at the ground and happened to notice my shadow. Since I'm terrified of shadow people, the sight of it made me a little uneasy. As I looked up, I saw something glowing and white about 10 feet away from me and assumed it was Mike, but it couldn't have been. Mike had worn all black that night. Its body was blurred a little bit, and it was kind of hard to comprehend. I kept watching it, and it just kind of slowly floated into the forest. After I saw it, I called Mike again, and he was in a completely different area than where I'd seen the thing, and he wasn't even in the trees, just near the end of them, but outside of them. The figure I saw was about human size, but it definitely was not human. I only say this because no one wearing all white was around. Plus, when it went into the trees, it was not touching the ground at all. I remember this experience clearly, and I know it was not my imagination playing tricks on me in the dark. It's never happened to me before when my mind makes me see things. The feeling I had when I saw this thing gave me the realization that this was real. I never fully believed in ghosts until I saw this. And I wasn't ready to believe every story out there was true, but it looks like I was wrong. So now there's a ghost out in my forest. Can it get into my house and bother me? For me, that would be the scariest thing ever. You know what's interesting? That triggered something in my brain. You know where my brother lives?
Yes.
So my brother lives on an acreage outside of Airdrie, Alberta.
Correct.
And on their property, the house is quite new, but the original barn is still there from the original farm and has been there since who knows when.
Yeah, that's right.
And I did pop into that barn once, and I popped right back out again because there's definitely someone living in that barn, without a doubt. There's something still hanging around there. You know which barn I'm talking about, right? He's got his shop, and then there's that old kind of shed barn thing.
Yes.
And then there's the house. Yeah, that barn. So when I read that about the old place they used as a chicken coop, it made me think of that.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. All right, next story.
So this one comes from France.
So cool.
As far as I can remember, ghosts and paranormal events have always been subjects I would eagerly bring up during a conversation I've read books about.
What's that like?
I don't know.
Sorry.
I'm not sure. Well, I did read some really good. There was one book from the elementary school library I kept reading.
Yeah, you went back to it?
All the time.
Yeah.
I just kept checking it out like week after week. But it had the lady in brown.
Oh, the rectory. What's that name? Rectory. Borday Rectory. It's like the most famous haunted house case because they actually got that lady in brown in the picture. Yeah.
And I just stared at that photograph so many times.
Interesting.
I did a lot of photography when I was a kid. I stole my dad's Pentax and had rolls and rolls of film, and I couldn't understand how that picture was done.
Yeah.
Because you can see the flash in the stairs.
Yeah, that's cool.
But the thing floating down was not of the flash.
There you go. Even then, you were a little creepy kid.
All right. Well, I was trying to explain the thing in the basement.
That's right.
And I found something when I was dropping my laptop off at work. I
Oh,
in the
yeah.
office. It wasn't happy that I was there.
Well, you were the only one there. It's a holiday here today.
Yeah,
so
it's,
all the
stat.
building is empty.
Very empty.
And Jason went in to drop his laptop off so he can save time tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And
I could feel something in the conference room.
yeah.
Like it was just staring at me.
And not happy you were there.
Yeah, I would say.
They're often not happy when we go into their space.
Yeah, that's right.
Like during their time, they don't do well with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was kind of freakish because there's light above my desk and then all the other lights around me were shut off. That was a little weird.
Not cool.
I felt illuminated when I was plugging it in and getting it ready for tomorrow. Ugh.
And then you're like, maybe this wasn't a great idea. Anyway, on with the story.
However, as much as I wished it, I never was a gifted medium, nor had anything that could allow me to be described as a ghost magnet or of the sensitive kind. All of the odd happenings in my house in France could usually be brushed off as a common disturbance, such as a creaky wooden house, little animals running around in the night, in the attic, or jack-o'-lanterns by the riverside. All but one. No matter how hard I think about it, there is one event in my teens for which I cannot find a logical explanation. It happened in 1998 when I was 16 years old. At the time, me and my mother and two sisters, respectively, 10 and 12 at the time, were living with my stepfather and his two children, 14 and 8. This particular year, we had spent Christmas with the stepfather's family in Vernon. Vernon is a medium-sized city, mostly known for its importance during World War I, due to its strategic location, but on the whole, a rather dull and sad place. There we were, about 1.5 hour ride from the place we've lived, and not having so much as a family, or not having so much fun in a family we didn't like very much, and wasn't really paying much attention to us.
That sounds pretty miserable.
Needless to say that my sisters and I were quite happy on the 25th of December, when around 5 p.m. we could get back to the cars and head home. To drive from Vernon to my hometown, you have to use those typical small 2-lane roads curling around in dark and deep hilly woods. Those were very dark forests are patched with swamps and old bunkers, and you always have to keep in mind that a family of boars is likely to cross the road right in front of the car. In summer, such a drive on a road basically roofed by 3 tree branches is nice and refreshing. In winter, it's plain dangerous. Most of the time, fog stays around, the roads are slippery, and you have to be careful if you don't want to end up stuck in the ravines running along the road. My stepfather and his 2 kids were in the car front, and my mum was following close with me next to her, and my little stepsisters asleep at the back. We weren't driving too fast, considering how poor the weather was. My mum and I were chatting about this, and that when all of a sudden I saw a solid black figure jump into the woods on the left side of the road. Jump out. It was huge, about 2.5 meters tall. It had arms, legs, torso, and a head. Just like a human being, but unbelievably stretched, skinny, and featureless. Moreover, everything about it seemed square and stiff, like it was a wooden imitation of a human body carved by someone who had only a very faint idea of what a human being should look like. In barely 2 huge steps, the thing crossed the ravine on the left and stopped like a scared deer would do, right in front of my stepfather's car. Said stepfather drove right through it. I gasped. My mother, on the other hand, had already hit the brakes. She didn't stop completely, nor did she swerve, but she slowed down enough to allow the thing to clear the way, if it felt like it. By the time we reached the figure standing in the middle of the road, it had turned its head towards us. It's a weird feeling to have a pair of eyes watching you intently, but not see them. As we were approaching, I could see this huge thing was carrying in its arms, close to his body, a big square object attached to his right wrist by a chain. Time seemed to slow down as I looked at the thing in the eyes. Doing so, I felt filled with sorrow and despair. I wasn't scared. I was flabbergasted, curious and worried we were going to hit it, but not scared. This being, however, felt terrified and did convey it toward me quite efficiently. As we were about to reach it, gone it was, jumping again on the other side of the road and back into the woods in a couple hurried bounce steps. My mother sped up to catch up with my stepfather's car, and nothing was said until my sisters both woke up, saying they were cold and fell asleep again. After a few minutes of silence, my mom said, "Did you see something?" And I said, "Yes." "Did your stepfather drove through it?" "Yes. Must have been an optical illusion. It's foggy, most certainly." And that was about it, until a few months later, when debating about ghosts and apparitions with a couple of guests at our house, I started describing the illusion my mother and I had seen that night. When I was done with, my mother stared at me blankly and said, "I saw a thick white mist. It behaved like you said, but it didn't have a human shape. It was just very lively white mist." Then I knew that I had not been an illusion. I had felt the shape when my stepfather drove right through it, and the feeling I had when it turned to look at me could not be washed off as a mere surprise. The road crossing thing was scared, painfully scared, and I felt it. The fact that my mom and I did not witness the same thing was somehow a proof that it was not a natural happening. Eyes see the same reality. Souls might beg to differ.
Mm-hmm.
I never could find out what that thing was, and we never drove back there again. There have been many stories concerning the forest, about soldiers from the previous wars, about car accidents and whatnot, but nothing related to a ghost chained to a square rock or box. The only tale I can relate this adventure to is one concerning those landowners who in the past used to move the rocks, marking the limits of their properties to gain a few acres of land. Legend wants that they have to remain earthbound until they can put the markings back where they should have been. The habit of moving one's property boundaries was common in this area. So it wouldn't be surprised to me if carrying this burden for so long that he barely knew anyone how to show himself in a human form. That being said, if anyone has a more convincing explanation for my mum and I witnessed that night, natural or supernatural, I'd be happy to hear it.
Wow. That's pretty interesting.
Pretty interesting story.
And it's interesting that they perceived it differently as well.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't the same for either of them.
Shadow versus white mist.
Yeah. And
That's
that
interesting.
all the mom saw was a white mist while the daughter saw like what looked almost like a human shape.
Yeah.
And that she could feel how scared it was.
And she could see it.
Yeah.
Like it looked at her. But without eyes.
That
That's not fun.
No, I don't think I'd be no, that would not be relaxing or pleasant for me at all.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next story. Back when I lived in Scotland, we lived near a forest, and I'd go walking all the time. Once I saw what looked like a little boy. He looked to be about 2 or 3 with blonde hair and jeans and a blue t-shirt on. He was hiding behind a tree, and I knew that there was a rather big hole behind the tree, so I ran up to him and told him to watch out. But when I got there, he was gone. There was no way he could have run away. There were no big trees around or bushes that he could have hidden by. I got the hell out of there. Then about 3 or 4 weeks later, I was walking in the forest, much deeper in this time, and I saw him again, dressed in the same clothes. Now there was a stream river in the forest, and I didn't want him to fall in because he was leaning over the water. So I went over to him and I said, "Sweetie, be careful, where's your mom?" He turned to look at me and ran over by a bush. I walked over to the bush, and he was gone. I was really freaked out again, but I kept looking for him because I wanted to make sure he hadn't gotten lost or anything, but I couldn't find him. I saw him many other times, and each time he'd look at me and run away. I only heard him speak once, and that one time he said, "Mummy?" That was the only time I ever heard him speak.
That's interesting.
The one time that sticks in my mind, though, was when I was with my friend Rose, and I was telling her about the little boy. We were walking slowly, and Rose kept looking around for him. I was just telling her about the time when I heard him speak when she gasped, grabbed my arm, and pointed up ahead a little path going into all the brambles. I followed her gaze, and I saw him, standing there, staring at us.
Uh-oh.
Rose started pulling my arm, trying to get me to go back, but I wouldn't. I got pretty close to him, and he just turned away, ran behind a tree, and vanished. Now, I know people are going to say, why didn't I run faster? Well, I didn't want to scare him. And the last time I saw him, I was trying to pick my way through thistles. I never saw him again, and later that year, we moved to Texas. Wow. Now, this is interesting to me because she did not see this energy as something to be scared of.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it freaked her out a little bit, but she knew he wasn't real, and yet she still wanted to show care for him.
That's fair.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So that's a really unusual take on it, because most people would be like, yikes, ghost boy.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm out. And they wouldn't come back. But she actually, oh, that breaks my heart, though, that the only thing she ever heard him say was, Mummy?
Yeah, Mom.
Oh,
that is
that's
sad.
hard. Oh, that makes me sad.
Sad, lonely apparition.
Yes. All right. Next story.
So this one takes place in Russia. All right. It took several weeks to terminate our lease at the apartment complex. We only returned to that flat for brief visits to collect belongings. As neither of us had really provided any furniture, that wasn't a big deal. Clothing, electronics, some decorative junk we had collected together to enhance the space was all we needed. While we fought with the apartment manager over last month's rent, we were staying at a small hotel at the waterfront. It was off-season for tourists, so the prices were reasonable, but still taking their toll as the time we spent there dragged on and on. As the fall season arrived, we were invited up the dacha, summer house, of my girlfriend's grandmother. It was a medium-sized village north of the city and easily reachable by train. We both figured it would be a great escape from the stresses of the city and our prior apartment, so we accepted the invitation, and by the third week in September we were off to Grandma's house. I'd stayed in dacha before, and they're usually pretty similar. A small wooden cabin or cottage, often with a thatched roof, really intricate carved woodwork, and dense ancient forests sprawling all around. Lydia's grandmother didn't have a dacha. She had a mansion. It was obviously built of the same style, but it was 3 stories tall and had at least 15 rooms.
Holy cow.
Imagine a log cabin on steroids with hand-carved posts and massive beveled glass windows, and you'll have some idea. The first thing I noticed about this babushka, grandmother, was that she loved American music. She talked about it for hours on end. Elvis in particular was one of her favorites.
That's amazing.
Next was that she liked to flirt with her granddaughter's boyfriend a little too much. She was grabby and spouted off weird innuendos and dirty jokes like no 78-year-old I'd ever met before.
I love it.
The first night we were in her home, we would tell her about experiences in the apartment building. She didn't seem fazed by it, nodding and smiling and agreeing with a lot of our comments. When we had relayed most of our stories, she stopped us, pausing to look deeply into the fireplace like she was examining the flames for some deeper meaning. You know, this house is haunted, she said to us. I'm not really sure what Lydia was thinking, but I was thinking, what? Mm-hmm. Why would she say that to us after we had been all that we'd been through? Babushka began to tell us a story about the weeks just before her husband died. She had a small collapsible tray overloaded in medications necessary to keep her husband alive. The tray was set up near the head of the bed on her side so she could quickly access them if needed. Often, before she would go to sleep, a figure would come into the room from the door just past the foot of her bed and stop, staring at her. She said the figures were always children and they wore traditional Cossack costumes.
Oh, good. Nothing creepy
probably
then.
dating from the late 1800s. 1, 2, sometimes 3 of them would come and standing side by side and cautiously approach the foot of the bed, sometimes stopping and placing their hands on the top of the footboard while they stared intently at her and her husband. She would call out to them asking what they wanted and how she could help them, but they never would respond. She said the encounter always ended the same way, with her trying to wake up her ailing husband, and when she turned back to the foot of the bed, they were gone. One night, they came again, and she was so frustrated and frightened by their regular appearance that she shouted out at them, "Leave me alone. Be gone from here." She shouted to us while she told the story, gesturing with her hands. The tray overloaded with medications then slid across the floor a half-meter and came crashing to the ground, pills and bottles flying everywhere. That was the last time she saw the children, and her husband died less than a week later.
See, and this is some of the advice I give to people. If you've got a ghost who's freaking you out, just ask them to leave you alone. Yeah. I mean, that was a little dramatic, but, you know.
Yes. I wonder if they were related to the husband.
Yeah, I do too.
She had several more stories as well, slowly recounting them as she tended the fire and occasionally took a photo from amongst the many that sat in the shelves around the living room. She would point to one and explain how this relative or that relative she had to speak to her, or how they themselves had witnessed something strange in the dark Siberian forest. She told us about her own brother, Lydia's great-uncle, who had been working for the civil militia police in the 1960s, guarding train depots. He would come home almost nightly with the strange tales of various things he would see while alone in the dark station houses. Phantoms of long dead passengers queuing up the line to take their tickets or move across the platform to their train. He would hear the whistles of steam engines that hadn't run for 30 years, hear people whispering, and even said that he would suddenly fall ill during his watch. Babushka told us how he would find belongings, artifacts along the train lines, watches, eyeglasses, rings, lighters. At first he would bring them home, but after a while runs of bad luck would convince him to return the items to where he had found them. When he finally began being removed from train duty, he had sworn he would never step foot in a depot again.
Oh, I believe that. Train stations, airports, hospitals, places of comings and goings.
Yes, that's true.
Lots of ghosts going on.
The stories were frightening, mysterious, and even so the way they were told. I looked around the large living room of her dacha, at all the objects on the walls and in the cupboards dancing in the firelight with large oversized shadows, and I admit I was terrified. Throughout the 1800s, Siberia was a favorite place for the Russian government to send its undesirables such as minorities, illegitimate children, even with royal blood, and vagrants. She said once the Trans-Siberian Railroad was completed, the trains ran day and night, carrying poor souls exiled to this region. Lydia interrupted her grandmother, scolding her for making up stories and trying to scare us. Her grandmother just smiled back, fluffing up her blanket and rolling her eyes. "Tak malod," she said a couple times while shaking her head. "Tak malod, tak malod." So young. It was my first real introduction to the dark, Gothic, superstitious way of thinking that most Russians in this part of the world held. Babushka then continued, saying, "Be careful, and that the dead are envious of the living, that they will do almost anything they can to feel warm again."
Yikes.
The scene was pretty surreal, but so very, very Russian. If I had grown up in this region, I probably would have been taught from an early age about how to ward against evil spirits and phantoms. I would have been told that they were all around me and that every ancient forest throughout this country was a place where they gathered. I was just so sick to my stomach when Lydia's grandmother stopped and stood up, going into the kitchen and returning with a freshly baked pumpkin stuffed with fruits and nuts. "You want some dessert?" she chuckled as she offered us some. I wasn't very hungry, and suffices to say, I didn't sleep well that night.
Whoa.
It's a pretty long one.
Yeah, and that's pretty freaky.
So apparently those were all the exiles went. So of course they weren't going to be very happy people to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. And they were looking for some comfort. Yeah, makes sense.
Oh my gosh, that's a terrible story. It's a good one, but
very good. Yeah, and a lot going on in it. This story is from the US. Honestly, we should save this one for our special haunted summer camp episode, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's in the trees. Every fifth grader gets the chance to spend a week in Camp Tyler in the middle of a forest. People say that Camp Tyler is haunted, but I didn't believe them. I went to Camp Tyler in the middle of the fall, and one day, while everyone else was getting ready to ride the zip line, I sat in a spot several feet away from everyone else. I had chickened out of riding the zip line. I felt as though someone was watching me, so I looked around, but no one was so much as looking at me. One night in Camp Tyler, we had gone out to watch owls, and we were on our way back to the cabins. We stopped, and one of the camp counselors mimicked the sound of a nocturnal bird that was nearby. I saw a partially transparent white figure standing among the trees, but no one else seemed to notice it. My best friend Jeremy and I began exploring the forest in his neighborhood. Jeremy stopped to check out some paw prints on the ground, and I heard something jump from a tree branch above me. I looked up, and by the looks of it, whatever had leapt from the branch had been larger than a squirrel because the thick branch was shaking and waving slightly. My breathing became shaky. "Jeremy, let's get back to your house," I said, looking at him. I had begun to feel as though someone was watching me. Jeremy stood up. "Uh-oh," he said. "I don't know where we are anymore." Suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up on end. "Jeremy," I said, starting to sweat from fear.
Oh, gosh.
Jeremy looked at me. "Do you feel someone watching you too?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Jeremy and I glanced over our shoulders because it felt like they were behind us. We followed a deep, dried-up creek bed. The invisible person followed us. At one point, Jeremy stopped and signaled for me to stop too. He listened closely to a hole in the left wall of the dried creek. I listened too, and I heard rattling. The only explanation for that noise is a rattlesnake, Jeremy exclaimed, quietly jumping back. Be careful. There's one here, so there are most likely others. Oh, good. So it's getting worse now.
Yeah, helpful.
Jeremy and I continued our journey to find a way out of the forest. Climbing over tree roots, pushing our way past vines, and watching out for snakes, the invisible person continued to follow us. Every once in a while, we'd hear them step on a leaf behind us. It felt like they were right behind me, right behind only me instead of both of us. I felt cold, and I was still sweating from fear. When Jeremy and I found our way out of the forest, we were a long way from his house. In fact, we were right beside Golden Road. We walked along the curb until we reached a train track, and we turned the corner and followed it. I sensed the visible stalker was still there, and my heart sank. Who's following us? I thought, glancing over my shoulder. No one was there. Soon we reached a road and turned. We're close, I think. I recognize this neighborhood, said Jeremy, leading the way. I still kind of felt the stalker behind us and muttered, good. It was getting close to sunset. We heard the sound of a leaf getting stepped on behind us, and Jeremy and I both jumped and turned in midair, startled. There was no one there. Jeremy and I exchanged glances, turned, and ran for it. When we stopped to catch our breath, my whole body was shaking. Jeremy started walking again, but I couldn't move. I felt something touch my back and the invisible stalker's cold breath on the side of my neck. A surge of fear flowed through me, and I ran to catch up with Jeremy. Eventually, we found our way to his house with no more incidents. Several weeks later, I went with Jeremy and his mom to his grandparents' house. We explored the forest there. Wow, brave. I'm not sure I'd go into the forest with Jeremy after that.
Yeah.
We eventually got bored, and Jeremy sat on a dead fallen tree and began digging into it, tearing it apart. I stood on a stronger, less rotten part of the trunk, and we talked for a while. Then I felt a sharp stabbing pain in the back of my neck. Looking up, I saw a dark figure standing in the distance, seemed to stare in our direction. My breath seemed to get caught in my throat. I glanced at Jeremy to see if he saw the dark figure, but he didn't. He was too busy tearing into the dead tree. When I looked back at where the figure had been, it had vanished.
Wow.
Oh my goodness, forests way scarier than we realize.
No, they can be, absolutely.
I mean, we've driven through some forests where both you and I have said this feels really, really spooky.
Yes.
And had an energy coming out of them, like for sure. Remember that one in Port Alice?
Oh, yeah.
On that back road?
Yep.
Oh.
Yes.
Did not feel safe. And then you and I went to that ghost town where the only thing that didn't move down the mountain was the War Memorial and the graveyard. And I got out of the car to take pictures.
Phoenix.
I got out of the car to take pictures. I'm taking pictures, and you were just like,
yeah, get back in the car.
Get in the car, get in the car, get in the car. Like you were really feeling it. So
yeah, I wasn't very happy.
Well, I got back in the car.
Phoenix was beautiful, though.
It was, yeah.
So the copper mine, if I remember right?
Yeah, it was a copper mine. And then after World War I, copper prices just sort of collapsed. And so they moved the entire town down the hill to join up with... Greenwood, yes.
Greenwood, British Columbia.
Yeah, which is a pretty cool town. Definitely haunted, though.
Yes, well, we wanted to buy that one house.
I know, the old Roman Catholic rectory.
That was a beautiful home.
So haunted, though.
Yes, it was. We missed that opportunity.
I don't actually think we missed it. All right. So our last story Jason's going to read, and this one is from Indonesia.
I and my friends, we're really into scary stuffs like horror movies and ghost stories. And of course, we love to visit reportedly haunted places just to challenge ourselves for fun. There are this
is going to be a tough read.
Forests.
Hold on. This is going to be a tough read because it is ESL.
Yeah.
This person has English as a second language. So,
yes.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it?
Well, let's try my autism. Let's see what happens.
All right. Go ahead.
So there are this vast pine forests areas up on a hill situated about 3-hour drive from where I live. Rumor has it that the forest is haunted. Many years ago, some poor people decided to end their lives there by jumping off the deadly steep cliff known as the Bow, as it resembles a ship's bow. People who live nearby have often reported sightings of ghostly body parts scattered around the forest floor
Ew.
and frightening sounds of screaming and human-like tortured cries for help. That's exciting.
Yikes.
We'd heard and known about the pine forest since we were little kids, but somehow we had never had the guts to visit.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be high up on my list of
I'd be
places to
very
swing
high
by.
to check it out. Yes. Until one day when we got pretty bored of visiting the other haunted places in town, we had never seen any ghost. And the pine forest came across our minds and we decided to give it a shot. At first, we seemed a bit reluctant, but then we all agreed that we need something a little bit scarier to do as we're all in our early 20s.
Oh, it sounds like the plot of every horror movie ever.
Well, I guess you could just jump. It was a foggy and wet night.
Perfect.
We drove our way up to the forest. From the moment I got in the car, I felt like something's not right. I just couldn't tell what it was. But I didn't want my friends to think that I was afraid, so I showed off a little bit by talking about scary possibilities that might happen there in the pine forest. When we finally arrived, the road that divided the forest was so dark and cold. We parked in front of an abandoned building and then made our way through the pine trees. Everybody walked so fast and nobody even said a word. The forest was so dark and frightening, we kept walking for minutes until we saw the bow. We sat down and gathered around and started telling ghost stories and scary legends related to the pine forest about the people who had died there.
Yeah, see, I would not be in this group. Plop. Oh, is that someone jumping off the bow? Very
Plop,
nice.
yeah.
Plop. Nice.
Yeah, well, you know.
Splat.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, something of that nature. Go ahead.
When my friend Bobby was telling his story, suddenly I saw a quick movement in the corner of my eye. Yeah, that's that Kotep.
Kotep, corner of the eye phenomena.
I turned around and whatever it was already gone. Of course it was. It's Kotep. Learn. At first I thought it could be some animal wandering around the forest, but then we heard scratching voices coming from the top of the bough, as if something was up there dragging its body up to it.
Oh, no.
Yes, that's so exciting.
No.
Exciting. I looked up and I could make out a vague dark silhouette of a man standing there looking down to us. I started shaking all over me, and my friends were now looking at me. Bobby had seen it too. He grabbed my shoulder tight and whispered, "Who's that?" I was too afraid to break the silence. "Let's get out of here," said Bobby in a low tone.
Good plan, Bobby.
But we were so scared we got petrified. Bobby was the first to get on his knees. Oh, that's not good.
No.
"We better get back to the car now," he whispered, and then started walking. We all followed him silently. As soon as the bow was out of sight, we started running as fast as we could. For a moment there, I thought the dark figure was coming after us. I was really afraid. I kept praying to God while running. When we finally saw our car, my friend Dickie told us that he had left the key in the forest.
I guess Dickie's going back by himself. I can tell you that.
We decided to break into the abandoned house and stayed inside until morning.
What?
Though it was dark in there.
No.
It was dark in there.
This story's getting worse and worse.
That night, none of us could sleep. Gee, I wonder. We spent the night feeling frightened in a tiny room in the house. It was a squeeze, but we didn't care. At around 2 a.m., we heard light footsteps somewhere in the left wing of the house.
Oh, no.
We squeezed closer and tighter, holding our breath. As the sound of the footsteps became louder and louder, I closed my eyes and plugged both my ears with my index fingers. And then I felt a presence in the room with us. But I kept my eyes and ears shut. I was too afraid. I got the tingling sensation as if somebody's standing pretty close to me. It lasted for about 30 minutes.
That's a long time.
I could feel my friends squeezing my body from all sides. When I finally got tired, I got my hands off my ears and embraced myself, but I kept my eyes shut. We sat there on the floor in the dark, tiny room for about 4 hours, but it felt as if we had been there for ages. At around 6 a.m., we finally got out of the house. The sky had looked a little brighter. When the sun finally rose, we got back to the forest to get the key, and we drove back to town as soon as we could. Nobody talked. We still couldn't believe our luck. We finally made it back home safe and sound. Until today, I still get the goosebumps whenever I think about that terrifying night in the pine forest. I, sure as hell, will never go back in there, even if it's the last place on earth.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
exciting.
No, not
love
exciting and very uncool.
I'd go there.
No.
The
no.
pine forest with the bow.
The bow. No.
Whee!
No, I don't think so.
Pop.
And then getting stuck in a haunted house all night.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way, and I hope you enjoy your fun camping trip the next time you go by yourself.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Okay, yeah, do that. Go find a haunted forest. Let me know how it goes.
I already did that once.
In a haunted
2018.
forest?
Yes, outside of Ukiah by myself.
Yes. That was
Cannot
cool.
argue that one.
No, that's true, and that was very weird.
I
And the
thought
funny
that
part
night I
was you
going to die.
but you didn't even tell me that where it was. You told me you had a rough night. We didn't really talk about where it was. And then when you and I went through Ukiah, I said to you completely unprompted, "Oh, this place feels wrong." And then you said, "You remember that night I had where I thought I was going to die? This is the place." And
Yep.
I'm like, "Yup."
Ukiah.
Oh,
Not a grand place, but that forest is.
desperately messed up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a nice way of saying it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of bad things that have happened in there for sure.
Well, you can actually, to anyone listening, you can, I don't know if they still have it on there, but the Netflix released a show called Sasquatch
Yeah,
that explains why that forest is so
bad.
sad,
Yeah,
miserable.
yeah. No, definitely check it out. All right,
Sasquatch.
friends, we are going to be right back after this. That's the end of our forest stories.
goodness.
We had more and more from India, but we kind of run out of time, so
We have
we'll
run
save
out
that
of
for
time.
another day.
So
We'll be
after
right back.
these messages, we'll be right back. Oh, yeah.
There you go.
I love that. That Kool-Aid guy, he just punches through a wall. And,
You are the Kool-Aid guy. All
so
right,
fun.
we'll be right back. All right, friends, as we talked about at the top of the show, we've got some pretty cool episodes coming up.
We're back.
And we're going to have like our summer holiday series.
Yeah.
We've got some other things coming on. And also, of course, for your listening pleasure, we do also do Ghost Stories We Have Heard, which is available to any of our paid patrons.
That's correct.
So please check out our Patreon. Either go
stories.
to ghostsandbears.com.
Ghosts and bears.
Ghosts, letter N, bears.com. And that is going to take you to our Patreon. It's going to take you to our Redbubble store.
All that jazz.
All that jazz.
All that jazz.
And you can also, of course, check out any of the other projects we have going on, like the Ghost Walks.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we would like to thank our lovely, lovely patrons
Very
who
grateful.
stick with us and just keep supporting us. And oh my gosh, thank you. And they include
Michelle.
Taylor,
Dawn.
Robin,
Maria.
Gina,
Sherry.
Marion,
Kathleen.
Alexa,
Mary Frances.
Christopher,
David.
Ashley,
Jeremiah.
BB Nix,
Melinda.
Jordan,
Tammy.
Taya,
Evan.
Arwen,
Steve.
Kyle and Charlotte,
Catherine.
and Mari.
Mari.
Thank you so much, you
We're
guys.
super grateful, guys. Thank you.
We are very grateful. Really, really, really grateful. And we're excited to be back coming at you every 2 weeks again.
Yeah.
Rather than just once a month. That feels
Oh,
good to
yeah.
be. All right, calm down.
I need Kool-Aid now.
And do send us any of your own stories. We'd love to have them on here
Yes,
and
please.
include them. And yeah, I think that's about it.
That's about it. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I loved having stories from all over the world.
Yeah, that was cool.
That was very cool.
It threw me off for a bit there with the last one.
Well, yeah, and I mean these are real stories from real people, so it's going to be a bit hard sometimes for the English because it is ESL. But you know what? They got the story across.
Yeah.
I'm not going to the bow
I
anytime
am
soon.
definitely wanting to check that out.
No,
Yes.
no.
Whee!
All right, friends. Thank you so much, and we will see you again next time. And until then, we are the podcast with the actual stories.
With the actual history.
No, actual ghosts.
With the actual ghosts.
with actual bears.
Sorry, old habits, right?
Yeah, old habits die hard. Take care,
They've
guys.
actually been around for many years now. It's weird.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.